Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Altispeed Technologies, the Ask Noah Show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said could be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour. To be a part of the program, it is a free call, 1-855-450-NOAH. It's 1-855-450-6624, or send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah Chalaya. I am your host, delighted to be here with you as another episode of the Ask Noah Show kicks off this hour. A reminder, our questions bot is live. You can join the Geek Lab by going to geeklab.ninja and send a message to questions:linuxdelta.com. That questions bot will place that question right in front of our face. Joining me again, as always, Steve Ovens. Welcome, sir.
Thanks again, Noah.
So, Vera Tunda asked on Wednesday, actually, of last week. We see that message, though. This week, we get into the studio. How did you manage to forget about Bitwarden in your list of must-have offline services? I host that myself, so I can access it everywhere through my VPN. But I don't need the internet if I have it locally on my LAN as well. Additionally, I would add AirSonic to that list of offline for listening of podcasts. That's what I do all the time because it's shocking how many podcast service will truncate the back catalog, making it impossible to capture the full history of broadcasts. Something I'm becoming increasingly concerned about is the digital extinction of our culture through bit rot, censorship, and general neglect. So first of all, thank you for doing that. I'll be the first to tell you that there's a couple of podcasts that I subscribe to that I've had an issue with them trimming the back catalog, as it were. And I've actually set up my answer hasn't necessarily been to self-host so much as it has been just to run Podget on a DigitalOcean droplet and just have it download episodes constantly and just keep them there. And if I need them, then I can get back. Another question comes in and says, I need some wire strippers that can strip wires smaller than 32 AUG. Any suggestions? My suggestion there would be they have wire strippers that instead of having the pre-cut little holes that you try to line up to the wires and strip, it essentially looks like two little grippy plier things. And when you squeeze the wire strippers, what happens is the two little clamps clamp down onto the wire, one on each side, and then they pull apart in opposite directions. And essentially what that does is it puts tension on the rubber of the insulation of the wire until the insulation of the wire essentially rips in half right at the middle point. So I'll have a link to such a pair in the show notes, but they're fantastic for stripping really small wires, what we use all the time. Again, phone lines are open if you'd like to join the program, 855-450-NOAH. It's 855-450-6624. The email, live@asknoahshow.com. Make your voice heard and become a part of the program. As always, we open with email. Your email goes to the front of the line, and so if you'd like to be included, send an email there. Also, we organize our main section based on what we get in with feedback. And so if you'd like to be a part of that, we invite you to send an email, live@asknoahshow.com. Our first email comes in from Charlie. Charlie writes in and says, good day, I came across this distro. And then he has a link. Accessible Coconut. It's a Linux distribution for the visually impaired people. Now, I have to give a shout out to Charlie for pointing this out because we have frequently gotten emails in from people that have said, hey, do you have anything for people that have impairment? Do you have tools for people that are impaired? And we talk fairly regularly about Ocular and the kind of tools that will help people that are impaired. We, so far as I know, have not covered any specific distributions. And so I was delighted to be able to take a look at Accessible Coconut. It looks based on, I've not tried it myself, but but just kind of looking through it, looks like a distribution with the Mate desktop and a number of tools that have been built in. A screen reader, a quick button to turn on or off the screen reader as you need, an on-screen keyboard. Also comes with a magnifying app, and then a Sharita Braille writer to write Braille. Now, I have to be honest, and Steve, maybe you can help me out here. How do you do Braille on a desktop, and how do you do that on a computer?
There are some screens that are actually able to do Braille. So you'd have to have one of those things, but I imagine if you are visually impaired, you'd have a screen that it basically is like a USB add-on, or you can get them like that, and it just kind of sits on your desk, and it gets programmed from the program on your computer, and you're able to figure out what's happening.
So it somehow mechanically raises little dots?
Yeah, essentially.
No kidding. Okay. So today I learned. Well, son of a gun. Today I learned. Yeah, here we go. Orbit 20. Okay. All right. So this is something I wasn't aware of that now I know exists. So I guess we'll have links to refreshable Braille displays that you could use with accessible Coconut if you were interested in that. But there's a couple things there. So first of all, huge thanks to Charlie for sending this in. But also, if you're one of the people that are out there that are struggling with a disability and you say to yourself, I'd like to use a free and open source operating system, but I need a certain set of tools, it's nice to know there is a distribution out there that contains a set of those tools. Now, it's also going to come with a full application stack, so you're going to get LibreOffice and Firefox and a dock and a text editor and GIMP and Shotwell and all of the programs that you would likely need to use a desktop environment, but it's going to all come as a bundled set and then include those accessibility tools right off the top. Steve, any thoughts on accessible Coconut?
I kind of took a look at it. I honestly shied away from trying it because it's on SourceForge, and I just have that. I have that knee-jerk reaction to things that are hosted on SourceForge these days. So I would hope that they might do something like host the ISO on GitHub or something like that, where there's a little more trust these days.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great recommendation. Hopefully, if it takes off, I'm sure they'll probably go that route. But it's interesting that stuff like this comes in because, again, we've covered accessibility a number of times in the few years that I've been doing Ask Noah alone, and I don't ever remember covering a distro specifically based around it. So this is fantastic. Thanks for writing in, Charlie. Our second email comes in from Anonymous. He writes in and says, hello, Noah. I've noticed that you've been all in on Matrix, and I've been considering doing so. However, I found this concerning article, and I'd love your thoughts on the privacy implications of Matrix giving these findings. And so he links to hacka.org. And essentially, really, this article references a number of other articles. I would say the most substance of which is an article from GitHub that basically talks about the notes on privacy and data collection of matrix.org. And so it's a bit of a long read if you dig all the way through, but essentially, so far as I understand it, the concerns are the following. For the first 3 years of Matrix development, from 2014 to 2017, most of the core contributors worked for a company called Amdocs, and they were paid directly to work full-time on Matrix. And then in July of 2017, Amdocs considered the project to be sufficiently successfully funded, and so they said, hey, you can now self-support and you can now self-fund yourself, so we're no longer going to do that. The majority of the core team went to work for New Vector, which was the company founded around Element, which was separate, I might add, from Matrix.org, which was the organization founded to govern the specification of Matrix. And so that is New Vector and its employees now deal with all of the development, who have since found donors who donate millions of dollars to keep the development going. The second concern is founded off of the fact that Riot, which is now the Element app, is a Matrix client that's created with Electron. And the argument there is that Electron is not considered free and open source by the Free Software Foundation. The third strike against it is Bridges. And they're saying that, hey, if you tie all of these other services to Matrix, have you not created a central hub for all of these services? Particularly if that central hub is matrix.org, then all of that information is going to pass through matrix.org. And so you're not really creating a decentralized chat environment if you're going that route. And then, of course, matrix.org being that central point, and then vector.im, which is typically used as an identity server, is receiving a lot of that private information and certainly a lot of that metadata, a lot of which can be personally identifiable especially if you know what you're looking for. And so they can be used to gain access to an IP address, which could then lead to a physical location. So again, it's a bit of a long read, and I'm not a security expert, so I want to be upfront and honest about that. But here would be the way that I would answer those questions or those concerns. So as far as Matrix being developed by Amdocs originally, or being funded by it, what I would tell you is that the Matrix team went through a reasonable amount of trouble to separate out the core specification from the actual development of the software. Keep in mind, nothing requires you to use Synapse, nothing requires you to use Element, the server and client respectively. You can take the Matrix spec and write your own server, and indeed people have. And so if you have concerns about Amdoc, you could certainly just look at it and say, well, I really like the idea of a decentralized, encrypted, federated communication system, so I'm going to take those ideas, I'm going to take the spec, and I'm just going to go implement it over here, totally away from all of these organizations. I think that works. The second thing is Riot being written in Electron. I think this is where we start to enter into the space where we have to balance a little bit security and convenience. So if you're the Matrix people and you're setting out and you say to yourself, we want to develop a system for doing this, and so we lay out how we're going to write this software. Matthew has said on this program, we didn't really intend it to take off the way that it did. We wrote the thing, and all of a sudden there's all these places and all these organizations that want to use it, and we're like, okay, I guess we're in on Synapse and Element, right? It was just meant to prove the specification, that the idea, the concept would work. And then they're going to go back, and they're continuing actually to rewrite things in Dendrite. And so there's a number of different third-party clients that have come up that are native clients that are not written in Electron and run perfectly fine on top of even things like Sailfish OS has their own Matrix client. And so I think that if there's a concern about Electron, that's fine and well. I would just suggest that you don't use a client written in Electron. But if you're the development team and you're saying, we need to get one consistent client that's going to work on all platforms, well, I'd be hard-pressed to tell you a better way to do that than to write that client in Electron, because now you're targeting the web, macOS, Windows, Linux, and it's all one code base, and it's just simply wrapped in an Electron wrapper. And I've been pretty in on Electron from day one because I think it's good for the Linux desktop, and so it would be inconsistent for me to differ here. But again, there's other third-party clients. If you don't like it, by all means. As far as it relates to the bridges, I have not heard this from anyone at matrix.org, so this is Noah speaking, but my understanding is that the bridges aren't necessarily designed to be the central thing. If you want to have end-to-end encrypted communication, you want privacy, you should be running your own home server. We'll get to that in a second, but certainly you should not be going through bridges. One, there's very few of the bridges that support end-to-end encryption, mostly because the other side doesn't support it. Additionally, there's going to be data leaks on the other side. So I can bridge to Facebook Messenger, and that's going to get me there as far as getting messages to and fro. But the Facebook side is going to be compromised because it's run by Facebook. And so if you didn't want to do that, if you didn't want that sort of central hub, you probably wouldn't be using bridges anyway. And then I'll kind of shift on from that to say that if those bridges are running on a central server like matrix.org, you've given up a certain amount of your privacy and, frankly, a substantial portion of your security because you have to trust the people that run the home server. So in the case of matrix.org, do we think the people that wrote a decentralized secure messaging server are compromising the server that they give away for free? Probably not. But if that was a concern, A, you could go audit the code, and then B, you go run your own home server. And the people at Matrix have been very clear from the beginning. They don't want to run some massive home server. The end goal of Matrix is to someday have the Matrix server embedded into the client and have a monolithic server client base that has account portability so that you install the app off of the Play Store or iOS Store or F-Droid or on your Linux computer, and that contains all the code that you need to run a tiny little home server as well as a client, and then send federated messages to anyone else. So you're not having to trust anyone or anything. The problem is, until we get account portability so that you can move your account from one home server to the other, that's not possible. And so until they can get Dendrite finished so that they can have a server that can be bundled with a client, that's not possible. So what we're left with is a very promising future, but a not perfect one as it is. Now, if you run your own home server and you tweak it specifically for privacy and security, then I think you can get there. And the article does mention that one of the concerns is with some of the default values that are set. And again, I go back to that balance of security and convenience. If you're coming from a Microsoft Teams or a Slack or a Discord or a Telegram, there's a certain expectation that you can find other users in the network. And telling people that for security reasons, we don't expose the matrix IDs and can't allow them to be searchable, like, that's great if that's what you're after. But the vast majority of people just want to be able to find their friends. And so having the option to say, hey, I want to lock this down or I don't want that feature, that's fine. Most people are going to go out there and expect to be able to have some sort of identity discovery. And that's where Vector.im comes in with the identity server. And I think they're pretty upfront when you go to enable and say, hey, I want to publish myself in the identity server. And it says, this is going to make you discoverable by other users in the Matrix community, and they're going to be able to find you. And to do this, we share this information with Vector.im. If you want to set up your own identity server, you can do that. But if you do this, here are the implications. And I think that's an okay trade to make. Now, Steve, I'm somewhat interested to get your take on this, precisely because I am an unashamed Matrix fanboy and you are not. So give me the level-headed other side approach to this. What should our concerns be? Or basically, really, maybe we don't have concerns, but what kind of questions should we be asking to hold the Matrix, the developers and the Matrix community accountable and responsible for delivering on privacy and the things that they promised would come out of the software package?
So I think that this is an interesting question. I read through a bunch of the links that we're referencing here and were referenced in the article, and I found them to be well linked. So I want to say I didn't check the references of the links. I simply read the material. So that's my disclaimer. But I think that Noah gives a lot of these things a pass because Noah likes this software, and I am decidedly not for it. Like, as a non-Matrix user, and it's not that I'm a hater or a detractor or anything like that. I've installed my own Matrix server and stuff like that, and played around with it. I look at this and I go, okay, if I was evaluating anything other than Matrix, would this be acceptable? And the answer is no, it's not acceptable, because yes, there's a balance between let's say convenience, like we talked about, but the whole pitch of Matrix is you run it yourself, it's secure, it's private, blah 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 blah. Oh, but by the way, you actually, like, the defaults are not private. Like, that's not okay. If you're pitching this as this is a replacement for, I don't know, Telegram, or pick some service, fine, you can have wide open defaults, but you're not. Like, this is, the framing is bad here. The idea that, oh, it's competing with all these other things that are trying to find their friends, like, maybe, but this is, like, you're not going to get adoption from these people. It's got rough edges. Even as a technical user, I found this experience to be subpar, and a highly experienced troubleshooter, and I found the experience to be subpar. Not that I couldn't get it working or whatever, but all that to say, if you're going to speak about, oh, well, the average user expects blah, then this thing needs to get a lot better than where it's at. And right now, its target market is me, is Noah, is this niche where we understand these points of view, and therefore it should be private by default, and those options to turn them on or off should be there, but you should opt into having things like, so just a quick glance over things that the gets reported back on even self-hosted clients are things like your Matrix ID, the email address, phone number, anything that's associated with the Matrix IDs, the usage pattern, which, by the way, I'm not necessarily not in favor of, but that should be an opt-in, right? You want that information, you should opt in. But the IPs of given users, the user's devices and system information, other servers that you're talking to, all of these sorts of things, I understand the technical reasons, and that's what has to happen in a federated system. But you've told me that I'm installing this thing that's privacy protecting, and honestly, part of this is my own lens. Like if I'm installing something at home on my LAN, I automatically think that I'm stepping up into the privacy unless I'm intentionally installing something like I don't even have an example, but intentionally installing something that I know is leaky. So I think that this was the wrong approach. They're trying to target the niche users, but then also saying, well, we're making this compromise to make it uh, accessible to the average person. But who is the average person? Like, if I set up this server and I put my mom and dad on it, I'm the one going over to their phone or whatever and logging them in or whatever. They have no knowledge of any of the back end. So the average user is not installing this, is not using this. So it seems to be a mismatch of who they're targeting.
So I would push back a little bit that their target audience is the security privacy minded. I think that the Matrix spec is built to accommodate those people, but I would submit to you that their primary target audience is business users. And if you look at where they're spending their development dollars and where they're getting their development funding is, it's primarily large government organizations, universities, hospitals that need on-premise hosting and need the ability to send encrypted communication. So I think when you start to look from that perspective, then I think that, in those instances, they're either paying EMS to set all of that up, in which case they're tweaking all of those things. When you're looking at self-hosting, I think the primary target audience is people that just want to talk with their friends and play with the technology. And I guess and maybe I'm making excuses here, but it seems to me that's where it's okay to step back a little bit and say, okay, I want some of these things to be discoverable. I'm going to turn on our interactive matrix room. Are you guys there? I know a lot of you guys use Matrix or host home servers yourselves. Do any of you guys have concerns with the privacy? And as we're going through some of these things that are talked about Matrix, does any of it concern you guys? Does anybody say, hey, I wasn't aware of that, and that kind of changes my perception?
I mean, I knew all this going into it. The bigger issue I have with Matrix and Element and all this stuff is that the actual workflow for getting started is absolutely horrific. Even for someone who's technically inclined like myself, it's a real pain to onboard more devices and more connections. I live in a multi-device world like most people, and having multiple devices is difficult. Beyond that, I think the defaults now are reasonable for creating rooms and establishing communications. Like if you create a group chat and you don't set an address when you're creating the group chat, like a public reachable alias address, it's encrypted by default. If you do a direct message, it's encrypted by default. All these things. However, they flipped that switch, I think, prematurely because the entire workflow around ensuring that you have access to encrypted messages is absolutely terrible. And I don't think they are putting enough effort towards fixing that.
Yeah, I've run into that myself. If you'll get a message and it'll say, the sender's key has not come through, those kinds of things. Here's the other thing too, and I'd be interested in your or anybody else's in the community's thoughts on this. I recently ran into an issue where I can no longer get notifications from mentions on encrypted messages on mobile. I can only do that on the desktop, and that changed. It didn't used to be that way. And I'm not sure I hope that's just them working through that and that feature isn't gone forever.
Yeah, they've been doing a lot of work with that recently. The whole push notifications, especially on all the mobile stuff. And that's been something that I haven't really seen come up. I've been having a slightly different issue where I get 2 notifications every time I get a mention. So I have the opposite experience. I think it's still very unstable right now in general. They just released a new push provider and changed everything over to it. I think it's called Swignal. Syngle, I think.
Yeah, I was gonna say they just switched over. They just switched over their push notification framework, and things are a little goofy with that. But at least for me, my notifications have always been a little bit haphazard. But that's also because I changed my client a while ago to only actually notify me when I'm at tagged, and so what actually happened for me was when they switched the providers, that setting got dropped, and I started getting notified again of everything.
Yeah,
Which
that's what went away, is I wasn't able to choose anything other than all messages or none. I couldn't do the tags, which is what I kind of missed. So I'd be interested to seeing this discussion unfold further. You know, it's interesting in the chat room. The Linux Ninja says that all of these options are opt-in. And he says he's never seen anything that his Synapse server isn't private. So it'd be interesting to look to see if all of this information is still current, if they've made changes. But again, I am very much interested in holding people accountable if we buy into a software and we subscribe to a particular ideology of, hey, we believe that this is secure and private, then it needs to be, or we need to understand how to make it secure and private. And so the only thing I counterbalance that with, again, not to beat a dead horse, but the only thing I counterbalance that with is, if you want to get people onboarded onto a new system, it has to be approachable. And I think to make something truly secure and private, it comes with a certain amount of nuisance in managing that, because there is a certain element of security and privacy that comes with it. And but anyway, it's an interesting discussion. I'd be interested in your feedback. Email us live@asknoahshow.com. Let us know why we're wrong, why we're right, and what you think of Matrix. I'd be interested to hear. The phone lines are open, 855-450-NOAH. It's 855-450-6624. The email, live@asknoahshow.com. James from Grand Forks, you're on Ask Noah. Good afternoon.
Hey, Noah, it's good to talk to you again. And Steve, it is a pleasure and an honor to speak with you for the first time this evening. Say I live in an older house, and it has the old school copper telephone lines running all over the place. We don't have a landline phone here anymore, and I was wondering if you guys, either of you, had any projects or ideas of how to use those lines.
Steve, do you have any thoughts?
Those lines can only carry a small amount of voltages, and so I guess it would depend on what you were doing with them. You could power some small devices on 5 volts, so like the ESP devices will run on 5 volts, and you can safely carry 5 volts over a phone line. But I wouldn't go much more than that. And phone lines, in terms of if you tried to make them Ethernet or whatever, will be horrendously slow. So it's there's not much use for phone lines anymore.
I'll tell you what I've used them for, and this is, you're either going to laugh or go, oh, that's brilliant. We will tie Cat 5 or Cat 6 to phone lines and use it as pull cord to pull Cat 6 to the intended location. And my house was built in the 60s, and that's exactly what I did. I went and said, I want 2 drops of Cat 6 to every wall. Oh, look, there's phone wire that's running to all of these, at these places in the wall. And I was able to pull the Cat 6 right into the box, and just using it as pull cord. Now, that'll depend on who installed your phone lines. If they stapled it down, you might not have that option. But really, the 2 things I could think of to do with it, other than use it for pull cord, would just be using it as like a closed contact pair to signal things, which wouldn't be horribly useful. But there's not much you can do with phone lines.
Yeah.
I think your phone's breaking up there a little bit, James. We'll give him a second to get that straightened out. But yeah, it's interesting. There was a time where they ran phone and coax cable to all the places in the house. And now we've started to move away from all that, and pretty much anything you could have done with those 2 standards, you can now do with Cat 6. The only thing I've circled back to coax for, I've actually started using RG6 again when we do structured wiring, because you can pull quad shielded RG6 into this coax cable that you typically use for cable TV. Yeah. We've started to pull that back to all of the locations with displays. The reason being, you can use it as a long HDMI cord. Essentially, what you do is you put BNC connectors on each one, and effectively what you have is an SDI cable. And SDI being the professional version of HDMI, then you can use like the decimators, the little red boxes that convert HDMI to SDI and convert back, and you're able to send a high definition video signal over a professional wire. And then you've just got those BNC connectors. You can use it as a big long SDI cable, and you don't run into the distance limitation like you would with HDMI. So kind of gone back on RG6. I have to tell you, I've not pulled phone cable since then, though. James, do we have you back? All right. I think James's call might have dropped, but you can give me a call back. We'd love to discuss with you further if we didn't answer your questions. Again, phones are open, 855-450-NO. It's 855-450-6624. The email, live@asknoahshow.com. Make your voice heard, become a part of the program. Our third email comes in from Gary. Gary says, "Hi, Noah. Telegram recently stopped supporting their Wear OS Android app. I've been looking for an alternative. My use case, my 11-year-old has type 1 diabetes. She's kept her Android phone in her bag and gets notifications and the message on her watch, Wear OS 2.0, to take her medicine. At school, and she could glance at her watch and simply reply from the watch. And then with Telegram, we always knew when it was delivered and read. We're currently doing it via SMS, but SMS is not reliable. We don't know when she has read it, and when she goes to the next school building, they block the cell phone signal and give her Wi-Fi because of the medical exemption." Just a short pause there. That's illegal. They can't do that. You cannot block a cell phone signal. That's willful interference and violates FCC policy. "I have been searching for an alternative with no success. I don't want to use WhatsApp or Google's offerings as they are out for various reasons. I looked to see if Matrix has a watch app, but couldn't find one. I'm fine running something that I have to host myself, but my choice of smartwatches is limited because she also needs to run the Dexcom watch app, which runs on Wear OS 2 and Apple. The choice is slim because FDA approvals, which is slow. I thought of Apple, but not sure I can mix Android phone running Dexcom CGM app with the phone app with an Apple Watch. Sorry for the convoluted message. Any thoughts would be welcome. Gary." So I'll throw this to you, Steve. Do you have any thoughts right off the bat?
As I was reading this, I was kind of racking my brain. This is an area where I'm not very well versed in terms of the medical side of things. When you're talking about being able to use your watch and stuff like that, except that the Apple Watches can take a SIM card. So my wife's watch can take a SIM card, for example, which means that you don't have to pair it with with an Android phone if the app that you need runs on the watch. So the messaging app and the health app, if they both run on the watch, or if you can get the health data somehow from, because I know that Apple's health app is actually fairly extensive if you get the more expensive watches. So I guess it depends on what information is being relayed there. Aside from that, I couldn't really come up with anything. The messaging is difficult at the best of times. The only other thing I could think of was Signal, because Signal gives you read receipt. It has a desktop client. You can also set it as your default SMS client so that it will work on both SMS and over data, which means you should still get the read receipt if you're doing a signal to signal communication.
I'm going to let Sleuth jump in here from the Interactive Matrix Room. Thoughts?
Yeah, so Matrix should work just fine. It has both typing and read receipts. The only thing that I would be slightly concerned about, given the fact that you're on a controlled school network, would be if you set up your own home server, double checking with the IT department that your host name isn't blocked. I've had that a couple of times with controlled networks with some of my users.
Okay. Yeah.
So the question would be, does that run on Wear OS? Because that was the root of his problem. Like, he was using Telegram, but they stopped supporting Wear OS. And so if he went to the Apple platform, he could pick up Telegram again. I know that my wife uses that firsthand. But so my question to you guys is, does Wear OS support Matrix?
Wear OS runs on the watch, correct?
Yes.
So then you just need notifications.
Potentially.
And Wear OS,
I'm just
Wear OS is also Android based, so you could. I don't know if the Element folks have decided to make a Wear OS UI. I would be surprised if they did this early, but it's not out of the realm of reason that it couldn't be that an Android, Wear OS app could be made. I just don't think there are enough Wear OS users to make that matter right now.
So just to kind of break this down a little bit. So the question is, so she has Wear OS, she's wearing that on her wrist, and she needs to be able to get these notifications, and she needs to be able to reply. So I guess the question is, if Wear OS doesn't have a specific Matrix client, does running the client on the phone, would that allow her to get what she needs? She can see the notification, she can reply.
Yeah. As long as the app uses the standard Android notification API to indicate that you can reply inline, which I believe the Element app
does use that. It does not, however, have mark it as read, sadly. Maybe that'll be added later.
Yeah, but because it can do the reply part since it already does it in the Android Notification Center, that Notification Center API also is how Wear OS works. So you will just be able to read messages and reply to them, but they won't get marked as read because that part isn't implemented.
So Atypical Kernel posted an app for a Wear OS app called Messages for Wear OS, and it claims to be able to tie into SMS, Hangouts, WhatsApp, Facebook, Slack, Viber, Telegram, a number of different messaging apps. So if you're looking for a specific app that you could run on the watch, this looks like it would fit the bill to talk to a number of different clients. Now, it doesn't include Matrix, much to my chagrin, but a number of other messaging platforms are on here and natively supported.
Yeah, I haven't personally used this app before. It's just it works on Wear OS and Telegram, and so maybe this would solve his problem.
Outstanding. Well, give those a shot, Gary. Let us know if that gets you closer to your goal or if we entirely miss the mark, and we'll go from there. Our fourth email comes in from Baku. Baku writes in and says, "Hello, Noah and Steve and the rest of the community. There's been an ongoing discussion the past couple of episodes on securely erasing an SSD. And as always, Noah was right when he said that there is no sure-shot way of securely erasing an SSD, and encrypting it with LUKS was the best thing that you can do. You can even make it a bit more secure by detaching the header. Rather than copying and pasting, I'd point to the original article. It's a small read, and all the commands are neatly listed here." And he puts the link. It wouldn't be a great idea if Steve and you document the entire local home automation process somewhere. Speaking of support in terms of GNU Linux world, Slackware has an amazingly, never stated officially though, long support cycle. For example, Slackware 14.0, released on 2012, is still supported to this day with no EOL announced. Slackware 13 was supported for almost 9 years. On average, you are guaranteed to receive security patches and updates for at least 7 years. Not bad at all, considering that this is completely free and there's no corporate entity backing it like Red Hat Canonical or SUSE. P.S. From Bangalore to all the way across the world, somewhere in the Dakotas, must have been quite a journey and adventure for Senior Chalaya. Ultimately, climate, unfamiliar terrain, and foreign culture, starting everything from scratch. Not easy by any means. Salutes to him. Hey, I'll pass it on, Baku, and thanks for writing in. We appreciate it. Steve, thoughts on either securely erasing an SSD or documenting the whole local home automation process?
I think we kind of solve the secure erase, or what I would do, which would be to destroy the drive. As for documenting the process, I was thinking about this. I probably will get around to doing something, although I'm not really sure what. I'm prone to doing diagrams as a function of my day job, and so maybe I'll put some diagrams together. I'm not really sure what kind of documentation the writer actually had in mind. So maybe you can write back in and give me an idea of what you're looking for, and I can see about doing it. Our
fifth email comes in from James. James writes in and says, "We have a newly rented 2-story community hackerspace with various light switches and power switches in a confusing layout. We'd like to automate power through Home Assistant. The intention is to improve accessibility and help our volunteers maintain space when opening or closing down. Would it be safe to VPS Home Assistant with Ansible, Wi-Fi, VLANs, Zigbee, ZWave? Any suggestions are appreciated. Thanks, James. So, Steve, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts?
I have plenty. So I would say Wi-Fi is going to be the cheapest and the easiest onboard, because almost everybody has some sort of access point. It's familiar with that. For where it falls down can be signal degradation and reliability. So in this case, I might be inclined to go with ZWave or ZWave, depends how you say that, due to the fact that it runs on the 900 megahertz spectrum. I know it's a closed protocol and that goes against the ethos of the show, but Zigbee runs on the 2.4 spectrum, and that gets interfered with by cordless phones and Wi-Fi and other types of devices, not to mention the fact that while Zigbee is an open protocol, you can have, and often do have, times where you'll buy something Zigbee and they won't be able to talk to each other. So the 30-second view that I'm stealing from somebody else on the internet was that Zigbee is like the little box when you go to a drive-in, and it allows you to talk to somebody else, but you could be speaking, one person could be speaking Spanish and one person speaking English. Yes, they can use the little box to talk to each other, but they don't understand what the other side is saying. Whereas in ZWave, it enforces you use this protocol, you'll speak this way, and everything ZWave will talk to each other. So in that regard, I like that. VLANs for sure, because I don't like to have anything I consider IoT traffic on a regular network. And I'm not really sure what the VPS with Home Assistant and Ansible comment is. I'd be interested to know a little bit more about that, but I'd still, like, for what it sounds like you're doing, you could probably easily buy a 4 gigabit Raspberry Pi and be able to coordinate your automation of the warehouse with kind of little difficulty. If you want to write back in, James, I will absolutely sit down and chat with you about this, and maybe we'll come up with something for the show about this, because this is a huge topic that I've been exploring for a few years now.
So I'm going to piggyback off of what Steve said about ZWave. Just to give a little background, I have traditionally used Lutron switches, and I have found them to be second to none as far as quality and their ability to do what they say they're going to do and function and all those things, to the point that my wife has no concept of what switches are speaking remotely to the controller, and then that's executing a command and turning a different light switch on, and which ones are actually controlling a load. They're that smooth. The problem is they're almost $250 a dimmer, and so that doesn't meet everyone's budget. I have recently, a friend of mine turned me on to these switches made by a company called Innovally, and I'm looking at their Red Series dimmer switches. They're ZWave. And the thing that I really like about them is, so they have a little controller on board, and it allows you to program that controller. So for example, you can have it do different things depending on if you do a single tap, a double tap, a triple tap, a quadruple tap, a quintuplet tap, a push and hold, and that will allow you to activate different scenes. Additionally, they have an LED color bar that runs along the side. And the thing that is nice about that LED color bar is you can program it to do different things. So you can program it to flash, blink, pulse, whatever. And so you can tie that to, so for example, in our house, tied to matrix messages. So if I see something comes in on our company alerts channel that is like hey, there's something massively burning down and somebody needs help, it flashes all those LED bars on the right-hand side red. And I know, hey, there's an alert and I have to go get to work. Additionally, you can tie them to different states in the home. So you could say, for example, somebody left the garage door open or the security system is armed. So you can have them turn green when the system is disarmed. You can have them turn red when the system is armed. You could have it show a different color depending on what the weather is doing outside. And then last but not least, they allow you to install them without a neutral wire. And if you look, a lot of the smart controlled switches require the neutral wire to complete the circuit. These do not. And so I'm a big fan of them, and I think they're like $50 a piece, $60 a piece. So they're pretty substantially cheaper than the Lutron ones. Again, they run on the ZWave, so not all the things Steve said about not hitting all of the open marks that we could potentially hit. But if you want a reliable switch that's going to do a really good job, and in this case, look absolutely stunning and have a ton of features behind them, I think the Innovally are definitely worth checking out.
I think I'll piggyback on that one and say, if we're looking for specific recommendations, I've been deploying a GE dimmer. Well, not a dimmer, a GE. It has a built-in motion sensor as well as like the smart switch aspect. And what I like about that is they're reported independently to Home Assistant. So that allows you to do all kinds of things. And the reason why I bring this up is because I have done a lot with motion sensors, and these guys are 100% solid in my testing. I haven't gotten false positives. I have, they catch me every time. They're just, they're really good. And they run about the same, about $42, $45 on Amazon for those guys. So big plug there.
We'll have links for you for all of these products in the show notes. You can find those at podcast.asknoahshow.com. Our pick of the week this week is brought to you by Sleuth in the chat room. It is photoprism.app. You can learn more at photoprism.app. So everybody likes taking photos. Everybody has photos they want to store. Google has discontinued their store everything forever unlimited. So now you're looking to self-host. And now you're thinking to yourself, I have privacy concerns. I want to store my images, but I want to store them securely and privately. What do I do? Well, PhotoPrism is an answer for you. PhotoPrism addresses your privacy concerns and allows you to archive your photos for the next generation. Now, they developed this easy-to-use application that you can host on your own server. You can host on a VPS. Essentially, it's a web app, but it's a web app written in Go. And so that means that it's going to be incredibly performant. It's not going to lag. It's not going to cause problems. PhotoPrism is a privately hosted app for browsing, organizing, and sharing your photo collection. It makes use of the latest technologies to tag and find pictures automatically without getting in your way. So you can say goodbye to uploading your visual memories to the cloud. Now, one of the great things is it supports WebDAV, which means you can browse you can browse them as a local file system, so you can go through and organize photos, those kinds of things. Additionally, it stores the originals by date. So if you ever want to pull yourself back off of this system, you can do that, and you'll just have a neatly organized photo collection. I hadn't had a chance to dig into this part of it, but I believe the way that they're doing this is there's a third-party app that can go on your phone, and that will sync your photos up to PhotoPrism, and the third-party app I believe is called PhotoSync. You can learn more at photosync-app.com. This is linked from the PhotoPrism site. Now, Sleuth in the chat room says that the phone syncing options they do have open source ones at the bottom of the page, so you can definitely check that out as well. But again, the app is called PhotoPrism. You can learn more at photoprism.app. Our gadget of the week this week is the quiet electric trolling motor. So you've probably, if you're on the lake, and I spend a ton of time on the lake, granted, I'm water skiing, so I'm going 60 miles an hour. I'm not so much worried about trolling motor unless we're fishing. But oftentimes, you want to go through your favorite fishing spot, or you want to maneuver around to your favorite fishing spot or stay in the right place, but you don't want to have to sit there and wield the trolling motor the whole time. Who has time for that? It's act like an animal, right? So what you do is you go over to Vancor, that's VANCHOR.org. They have an open source trolling motor packed with features. Now, Vancor is an open source trolling motor, for smaller boats. It's created with the goal in mind of being cheap, easily modifiable, and fits your needs. So the total cost of this project, including the cheap trolling motor, is about $300. It has a tiny little web UI that you can load. You can load it on your phone, built into the device itself, and you can give it a set of GPS coordinates. You can give it a track that you want it to follow, and then the trolling motor just follows it. Again, entirely open source from the hardware down to the software, and for under $300. You can learn more at Vancor, that's VANCHOR.org. A question from our questions bot. Again, you can message at questions:linuxdelta.com. I'm getting into VLANs in my home network. I'm looking at some TP-Link managed switches. What are your thoughts on TP-Link switches? Or do you have a different company that you'd recommend? I only need about 8 ports per switch. Steve, thoughts?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I haven't used the TP-Link ones, to be honest with you. I've been using the Unify. I know I should be hiding under a covers when I say that around our group here. But Unify has been the people that I have gone with outside of, I've used Dell's kind of professionally and the HPs, which are really nice, but don't have any of those at home.
So we at work, we primarily standardize on HP, and I would tell you that, well, I'll start here. If you need the actual performance that is advertised by the white paper, then really your only choice is Cisco. But past that, all other brands are they all perform pretty well. I've yet to find an enterprise network that has a need for features that HP doesn't accommodate. So I'll put that out there. But then when it comes into inexpensive switches, and we run into this quite a bit with nonprofits, we run into this quite a bit with churches, and we run into this quite a bit with power home users, which increasingly more and more we're getting called to do service calls there. TP-Link is a great option. I find them to be some of the best budget switches out there. I will tell you that in my house, I have 3 TP-Link switches. I have one for my dedicated, offline network, things not connected to the internet. I've got another one for my security network, and they work fantastic. They have a really decent implementation of VLANs, so they don't try to obfuscate it so much to the point that you can't get things to work or you can't figure out the terminology. They essentially just kind of adopt the way that Cisco and HP and all the big players have done it. I've never run into any issues with the switches not being able to handle the network load. So they seem to work just fine. And I also have seen them. There's a organization in town that uses them quite a bit for their VoIP technology, which anybody that's worked in networks knows that can be kind of demanding. And then they work fantastically. So if you're looking for an inexpensive switch, I would highly recommend taking a look at the TP-Link switches. In the news this week, Fedora 35 beta is all about polish. So they are extending the existing features and adding features to support the next level of experience for Fedora Linux. So whether you use Fedora on the desktop or as a cloud-based image or a Linux container image, you're going to find that the improvements that Fedora 35 have made makes for a pleasant upgrade. Now, with the Fedora 35 release, they're improving some third-party application supports and making it easier to install a selection of third-party software via FlatHub. And so that means when you go to do things like Zoom or Minecraft or Bitwarden or other popular applications, instead of having to figure out, well, how is this packaged? Where does this come from? What source? All the things. You simply go into GNOME software, and it's going to bring those things to you via FlatHub. Now, one of the most exciting things that's coming is the new multitasking panel. Now, this comes as part of GNOME 41. It has the ability to disable hot corners, disable the active screen edges, a dynamic or fixed number of workspaces, the workspace behavior and multi-monitor, and app switching preferences. They also, and we talked about this a little bit in the past, they have a new cellular panel that's been introduced in GNOME 41, and this is going to enable you to do things like if you have an LTE modem that is connected. A lot of laptops are shipping with them, but even if you have a USB one, you'll be able to control that. GNOME 40 also introduces power profiles into the settings app, and so GNOME 41 devs have made it possible to switch those power profiles by showing them in the status menu by default. Ubuntu 21.10 beta is out, so you've got a choice right now what you want to test and which direction you want to go. This is going to include GNOME 40 and not 41. So as you'll remember, 40 is the GNOME team said, how do we make the ideal desktop environment for our users? Took a bunch of feedback. GNOME 40 is what you got back. One of the big things they changed is the horizontal workflow. And so you're going to get that with Ubuntu 21.10. The activities overview is now both a window picker and a workspace switcher, and so you can get to the screen by clicking on the activities label in the top bar and then switch by single tapping the super key. Additionally, the Ubuntu dock is still present on the left-hand side of the screen at all times and now has 2 new items, a trash can and a separator. And finally, in the news, Spaces is out of beta from Matrix. You can learn more at element.io/blog. So Spaces is the ability to organize your Matrix rooms, either publicly or privately, allowing communities to join a given space and automatically be added into a number of rooms. As additionally, you'll be able to manage permission for those rooms. Well, we've played with that for a couple of months. It's now exiting beta and is published as part of full release. And so if you download the latest version of Element, either for iOS, Android, or your desktop environment, you'll have the ability to organize your rooms as spaces. They've done a lot of polishing on subspaces, that is to nest one space inside of the other. They've done a bunch of polishing on the landing information, which is something that we actually struggled with at Southeast Linux Fest, so that's exciting. And finally, space discovery, the ability to discover spaces, and then join them. Things that they're going to be working on is bringing it up to feature parity on iOS. Right now, you're not able to do all of the things on Spaces on iOS that you're able to do on the alternative operating system. So they're hoping to get that up to snuff. And with that, the music in my ears means we're out of time. You can follow us on Twitter. Steve is at Linux Ovens. I'm at Kernel Linux. The show is at Ask Noah Show. We record every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central at AskNoahShow.com. See you next week.